All right, I've got a sort of special one for you. This is a fly from back in the day that is called an irresistible or rat-faced McDougal, irresistible Adams or rat-faced McDougal. And basically what it is a hair-bodied Adams, conventional old-school Adams, but with a spun hair body. And I get asked about this fly a lot, so I'm going to tie you one. And I'm tying this on a size 14. This is a Tiemco 100 SPBL. You can see that little spear point there. And I'm going to start with some 30 Denier 18-aught Nanosilk. And I'm going to use white. It doesn't, this thread's not going to show. So I'm just going to start with some white. And I'm going to start my thread up here at about, I'd say that's going to be 70%. And I'm going to wrap a thread base back to the bend. And at that point, I'm going to tie in the tail. And what I like to use for the tail is moose Hock or moose body hair. So this is a dark colored, very hard hair. And I'm going to take a little clump of this, and I'll cut it from the hide, and I'm going to clean it out. And then I'll put it in my small hair stacker. And one of the reasons I use the moose hair, aside from it just being a very stiff, nice tail, is that it's much harder hair than the deer hair that we're going to make the body out of. So when we go to trim it, our blade won't cut it as easily, and we won't end up cutting the tail off accidentally. So I'm getting my clump here. And I'm going to stack that up in my stacker. Like so. And I know that's dark, but I'm going to measure that a shank length long. And I'm going to tie that in back here at the bend. And I'm going to wrap forward over those butt ends up to just short of where I started the thread. Then I'll lift those up and trim those out. I can get both of them there, those last two. There we go. Now I'll bring my thread back to the base of the tail. Now you can see with this Nanosilk, this is a strong thread. When I pull on that, that tail doesn't do anything. That's a very solid hair. And that's, again, one of the reasons I like that, not only for tails, but particularly for tails on this fly. So now I'm going to take some, this is mule deer body hair. You can use whitetail also. This is kind of a gray color, kind of matches the color of an Adams. But if I hold that up close there, you can see, let's see, do that way. You can see that hair is corrugated, and that's what I want to use for, this is spinning deer. This is what I want to use to make a spun deer hair body. And I want an oddly large size clump for a little fly like this. So you can see I just cut that off the hide, and there's a lot of underfur in there. So I want to make sure I clean all of that out. So I'll clean all that underfur out. So I've got a nice clean little bunch here. And I cut it and cut just the butt ends off, so you can see what I've got there in my fingers. It's just the butt ends of the hair. And I'm going to take this clump of hair, I'm going to lay it on top of the hook. I'm going to put one turn around it and another turn around it, right behind that turn. Then I'll start to flare that bunch of hair. And then I can just let that roll around the hook. Now it will catch on the hook point here. I can flare that back and pull it out with my scissors. I'm going to show you another little trick. I actually forgot I knew this trick. But now I'm going to show you another trick to keep that from happening. I'm going to cut another clump of hair and clean it out. This is a trick I use on the Goddard as well. So I'm going to cut that little clump. And when I lay this in, I want these butt ends to be shorter than the hook gap is wide. So I can do that same move. You can see I've got to hold it in a different hand to show you here. But I'm going to put two turns, 1, 2. Start to tighten that a bit. Now you can see these butt ends are short enough that they will flare inside of the hook bend when I spin that clump. Get that good and tight, and then I'm just going to walk the thread very tight, upright wraps, through to the front of that bunch of hair. And I can kind of part that back, slide that back out of the way. Now I just noticed my camera battery is about to die, so I'm going to pause right there. I'll be right back Don't worry. Maybe go get a drink. No, you don't have time to get a drink. Stay right where you're at. I'll be right back. All right, I told you I'd be right back, so here I am. I hope you had time to get a drink, because I went and got one, so I'm all good now. You didn't get your drink? Well, teach you to listen to me. All right, so I've got the thread worked through that first bunch, and I'm going to take another bunch, really about the same size, maybe just slightly bigger, and I'm going to clean it out the same way. Get all that underfur out. And I just want to use these coarser butts. I don't want to use the finer stuff, finer, harder hair toward the tips. And I've cut this down into a short little clump too. It's about a shank length long. So I'm going to pull this hair back, and my thread's hanging right at that front edge, and I'm going to put the middle of this bunch of hair right up against that front edge. And I'll put one turn. You can kind of crease it with that first turn, and then the second turn, and just start to pull that hair down. Now I want that to stay on the hook there. And now I'm going to hold onto the hook and spin that hair around. You can see how I can kind of work that around with my thread. And I'll push this hair back and kind of pack it all together. And I want to make sure that I've got enough room for wings and hackle up here on what we've got left. So I can usually pack that together, but you can see we're just barely off the end of the base of that tail. Then I'll come in and whip finish that thread. And typically, if you're going to do a bundle of these, spin all these bodies and then come back and trim them all at once, and then do the wings and hackle all at once. But for the sake of showing you what we're doing, I'm going to take this out of the vise and do this start to finish. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to take my scissor blades and cut at a steep angle back toward the tail here across the bottom of the fly. So I've got a nice flat bottom. And that is angled. I shouldn't say flat. I'm going for a cone shape here. And this is a rough shape to start right now. As you can see, I'm setting my scissors in at an angle down toward the tail. And very often I'll do this with a razor blade. I've actually tied a few of these in the past few weeks, and I've been using these Renomed scissors, and they work really nicely for this. You can see when I cut this hair, it doesn't push, and I can get right up to the base of the tail. And really what I'm working on right here is trying to get a good tight little point back here at the base of the tail, like so. I'm making a giant mess and it's driving me nuts. And then I can kind of come around and square off or round off any square edges that I've got there. And just depending on how picky you are, and I'm very picky, you can spend anywhere from 30 seconds to 4 or 5 hours trimming these bodies. But basically what we want is what you do with a dubbed body. This is going to be obviously a little fatter just because of the material. But basically the same kind of thing that you do for a dubbed body fly, same kind of shape. And that front edge, I'll show you how to clean that up here in just a second. So now I'm going to come in with my razor blade. And again, like I say, most of the time I do this in my fingers rather than in the vise, but I want you to see what I'm going to do here so I can kind of clean up these edges with a double-edged blade. And I've just broken this one in half. And by all means, use the rotary feature of your vise where you can. You want to be careful not to cut too deep, because if you do, you'll nick your thread and the whole fly comes apart, which is super exciting. Now, for this front edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this razor blade and basically just push it in right into the hook shank. And what that did is just cut a little notch out over on that side. And I'm just going to follow that notch. I'm going to try to make a flat face. This is the same way that I make a popper body for a bass bug. And I cut that hair that's sticking out the front off with the blade. There's always one stubborn one. There it goes. and then I can kind of clean up those ragged edges, and usually I will do that with scissors. The further the hair gets from the shank, the harder it is to cut with the blade. Got kind of a high spot here. I want to take that down a little bit. I'm going to take that out one more time and just give them a good once around to clean them up a bit. And I'm being conscious of, I know this isn't where you can see it. Here we go. Get it back up here. I'm cutting 0.5 millimeters of hair off, in case you were wondering. And I'm going to call that probably pretty darn close to good enough. Like so. So we've got this little conically shaped body. And I know that's the most boring thing in the world to watch somebody trim deer hair, because it's tiny little increments at a time, but that's the general idea. Now, there's a little bit of raggedness to the front edge of this body. You can square this up. I'll show you this little old-timey trick. Take your razor blade and bend it, and put your thumbnail or fingernail against that front edge, and just push the blade up against your nail. You can square or round and clean up that front edge a bit. And I still have a weird little spot down here that I'm going to try to nick off. I'm going to call that good. I've said that several times. You see how this works. You never really want to call it good. You always want to make it just a little bit better. But in the interest of time, we're going to call that good. So now I'm going to restart my my Nanosilk, and I'll wrap it right up to the front edge of the body. And I'm going to divide that front 35% of the hook, and I'm going to put the wings in the middle of that section. And the wings are the same thing that you'd use on an Adams. This is a Grizzly hen cape, and I want to find 2 nice round-tipped hen feathers. And this is a vintage Metz cape that I had in my stash. It's got a couple. So actually a really nice cape for this kind of thing. Very nice round tips, except one of those tips is busted up, so I'm going to get rid of it and find one that's not. All right, there we go. So I'm going to get 2 of these feathers that are about the same size and shape. And I'm going to oppose their curves, so they curve away from each other, and even the tips up so that they're the same length. And I'm going to measure them about a shank length long. Now, I like to tie these in with the wings pointing out over the eye. So I'm going to take my measurement there. And what I'm doing is I'm going from just behind the hook eye here, and I'm closing my fingertips right up. I don't have these quite even. Closing my fingertips right up to the bend. But you do want to make sure these are square first. There we go. All right, so now I'll close my fingertips right up to the bend of the hook, right at the base of the tail, right where the body and tail come together. And then I'll pinch it there, and I'm going to cut it just a tiny bit longer than that measured length. So I've got the tips measured, cut to length in my fingertips here. Now I'm going to lay my thread. My thread is hanging at the middle of that front 35%, and I'm going to tie these in with a pinch wrap. A couple of them even, right here on top of the hook. Like so. I'll take my thread and I'm going to wrap back over what's left behind there. And then I'll come to the front. I'm going to close my fingers under the hook. And I'll build a little thread dam here. And this is to stand these wings up. I want to try to get a hold of those wings as close as I can to the hook. And I'm going to build a little thread dam up against the front edge to stand those wings upright. And really, I just depend on the natural curve of the feather to hold their division. Now, here between the wings and the body, there's a few little fibers that will invariably be splayed out. It's just from where you tied them down. I usually cut those out so they're not in my way when I'm hackling. They will get buried in your hackle, so it's not a huge deal, but I try to clean them up a little bit. You know me. All right, now I'm going to take a brown and a grizzly feather. And you can do, I've seen Irresistibles tied with just brown hackle. But I've always liked to tie them with a brown and a grizzly. So I'm going to take a brown and a grizzly that are appropriately sized for the hook. And I'll stack them one on top of the other, inside to outside. And I'll strip some bare stem. So I've got bare stem equal to that front 35% of the hook plus about a half a turn. I'm going to bring my thread right back to the front edge of the body, and that's where I'm going to tie this in. I've got this just a little long, which is not atypical. I seem to do that all the time. Nip that down just a little shorter. Catch that right at the front edge of the body. I'm going to wrap over those stems right up to the base of the wing, and then cross underneath and come right up to the hook eye. Now at this point I'm going to wrap both these feathers at the same time. Just one turn right in front of the other. And I try to get 3 turns behind the wing. I'll sweep the wings back and put the next turn right immediately at the front edge. And 2 turns in front. And I'll pull both those feathers up and tie them off right behind the hook eye. I'm going to come in and trim those 2 feathers out. I've got a couple of loose fibers here. That last turn wanted to roll a little bit, but I managed him. Yeah, looking pretty good. Now I can sweep this all back and build a little thread head to cover that. Now, one of the things with the Nanosilk is it's such a small thread. It takes a lot of wraps to cover the stubs of those hackles. So you're going to take a few extra turns there to get that cleaned up. And then anything that's kind of sticking out where it shouldn't be, I'd say we're in pretty good shape, really. You can trim out. And then I'll come in with a black marker, and I'm just going to color 4 or 5 inches of thread here. 3 or 4 inches probably. And I'll use that to cover that thread head, just to black that up like it's supposed to be. And then I can whip finish with that black thread right on top. Nick that thread out of there. And there's our old rat-faced McDougal. John Barr and I make fun of this fly all the time. We always pimp the old flies, and this is one of our favorite subjects, the rat-faced McDougal, just because it's got a cool name. I don't know who old Ratface was or why he was a rat face, but this is his fly, and super buoyant. I did fish this fly a lot when I was a kid. Super buoyant because of that spun deer hair body, and kind of a fun little challenging tie. Yeah, not bad, not bad. I'd say his body's a little fat down here across the bottom. I could have trimmed that a little closer, and I might actually show you a trick for that. I'm going to grab a pair of scissors here, a pair of heavier scissors, and I'm going to take this razor blade and cut it at an angle. So now I can take the tip of this inside the hook bend here and knock that high spot off so that I feel better about myself. It's one thing to sit and tie these in your by yourself on Sunday morning. It's another thing to do it on a video where I make all you poor people sit and watch me agonize over this. But I'm going to call that good. I'm leaving it. That's the way it is. I could have trimmed it cleaner. I probably still will, but you get the idea. That's him, Rat-Faced McDougal. Now you know. Thanks for watching. I'm Charlie Craven.